It is that
It was talking about the present moment and time and our concept thereof. And the quote was along the lines of what was here a moment ago is no longer here. The moment keeps slipping away. We try to manage the moments of our life on a day to day and longer term basis, but it's impossible to hold anything in place, for the nature of what is here is to not remain. It's as if the moment is in a constant state of liquefying, vanishing, the constant state of slipping away that which we call now. And then later on, there was another bit comparing the present moment in time to an ever blossoming flower, which will never cease to blossom. And my curiosity is what that means to you. And I guess the last thing I'll note is that I can kind of think of ways to apply this from time or presence or consciousness, rebirth. What is born is dying, is what is born dying as it is born. Those are just a few different thoughts I had in the 10 minutes left of my drive.
so I've been thinking a lot about both impermanence and the fact that things are eternal. So from the perspective of time being a construct and really just an illusion that is brought by our density of consciousness that we're currently at, I kind of like the idea that everything happens everywhere all at once and that it's all happening and that we can only see the present moment and everything else seems like an illusion to us, but it's just as real as anything else because anything we perceive is just electrical signals in our brains. So a memory or a dream of the future, they're electrical signals in our brain. So is one electrical signal less real than another electrical signal? I don't know that it is. And even with our senses, perceiving any moment, each fleeting moment, we perceive less than like 1% of 1% of 1% of 1% of what's out there. Our ears hit just the tiniest range of all possible sound. Our eyes pick in the tiniest range of light, right? There's just so many things that we cannot even detect that are all around us at all times. Um, so my current answer is about paradox, which I think is the key to the next tier of human consciousness. And it matches, the idea in spiral dynamics that opens up tier two consciousness. And I think a lot about also, and it's funny that it's coming up in Loki because I've just been obsessed with this symbol forever of the Ouroboros. I love the idea of the Ouroboros. And in one of my acid trips where I was bungee jumping through time and space, I wanted to see how far I could go in the micro and how far I could go in the macros. So I'd zoom in and dive into an atom and try to go subatomic. And then I would go out and try to go as far out in the galaxy as possible. And what I found, and of course, this could be just the delusions of my own mind, was that I eventually got to a place where all these weird globule things like floating around and patterns I couldn't perceive as even being patterns. It all just seemed like random, chaotic, weird, colorful globule things and masses and clouds. And I don't know, it was weird. But they became the same. So when I went out as far as I could, past the galaxies and the swirl and everything, I eventually got to this place that looked exactly like happened when I went in past the electrons, protons, and neutrons. And I felt like it was just, yeah, an Ouroboros, never ending. And that's currently my concept of existence. Is somebody born dying? Yeah. And all the juxtaposition of things that don't seem to hold together. For example, balance. Balance doesn't exist because you could try to balance things perfectly as much as you want, but you can always zoom in and there's always going to be an imperfection that one side has 0.00000000001 more than the other. And then you cut that and you cut that and you cut that, and it's never going to be balanced. So I think the only way you balance something is like with a pendulum, not by actually having something be balanced. And in the same way, I don't think you could ever actually have a present moment. You could always zoom in further and further and further, and that way it slips away and it never exists. Like the present moment never exists because it could always be smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller infinitesimally. But at the same time, everything exists eternally forever in some kind of way. So that's my current answer.
That's so cool. I really like that the contrast between like everything's happening all and then like you could just keep zooming in even more infinitesimally. I mean, I'm just thinking of like how subjectively we experience time and how some moments can feel like they last like forever, like this kind of like cinematic like slowing down. And other times it's like, oh, where did the day go? And then yeah, it does make me wonder like what does it mean to be present and what is that quality of consciousness that makes us feel more like kind of turning up the saturation on what we notice. I certainly resonate with kind of like this idea that we're all simultaneously like even in from the moment we're born, we're like marching towards death too, right? But then we're also marching towards like rebirth because after that it just continues and continues. What are the things that allow us to really like feel like we're enjoying whatever moment we're in, whether that is a moment like a memory or a daydream or like we're just really in what we're doing? What's the quality of attention that allows us to really appreciate that?
I'm pulling back just different experiences. And I think one of them, Chi, was like we do these morning meditations. And there was like this one time that I woke up at 7:20 or 7:30. But it was that one time that rather than rushing, I got up, I was able to brush my teeth, I scraped my tongue, I brewed some coffee, and then I even did a little quick hip thing before I saw you and I was like, hey, what's going on? And I felt like I just squeezed time and I wasn't even rushing. I was wondering what neurochemically was happening for me, right? Relative to other times when maybe more cortisol was released or something. And so there was that perception of actually being able to skew time. When I just think of that quote more subjectively to my life experience, it's like not being too attached to any one kind of meaning, but having a sense of malleability into my perspective, knowing that maybe there's another way. There's another way of looking at something, and to just be open to that. And so, for someone that's super logical like you, Chi, I find myself that as I'm getting older, I'm actually widening. I'm becoming more open-minded to different modalities because I just realize I don't know shit. And so life is more intriguing that way.
Yeah, I guess this quote made me think about birth and death in different ways, in ways that were not necessarily happy or sad, but just ways that are and that are to be accepted.